I never thought the proudest day of my life would become the day I learned exactly what my daughter really thought of me. Standing there in the university auditorium, watching Jessica walk across that stage to receive her diploma, I felt my heart swell with pride. 4 years of tuition payments, countless care packages, late-night phone calls offering encouragement through difficult exams. It had all led to this moment. But what I overheard her say to her friends afterward would shatter everything I believed about our relationship and set in motion a chain of events that would change both our lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Morrison, and at 52, I thought I had done everything right as a single mother. When Jessica's father walked out on us when she was only 8 years old, I made a promise to myself that his absence wouldn't define her future. I worked double shifts at the pharmaceutical company where I'd been employed for nearly 2 decades, sacrificing weekends and social opportunities to ensure Jessica never felt like she was missing out on anything her classmates had. The graduation ceremony at Northwestern University was everything I had dreamed it would be. Jessica looked radiant in her cap and gown, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the auditorium windows. She had graduated summa cum laude with a degree in marketing, and I couldn't stop myself from taking what felt like hundreds of photos. This was my moment too, proof that all those years of financial struggle and personal sacrifice had been worth it. I had saved every spare dollar for her education. While other women my age were buying new cars or taking vacations, I drove my 15-year-old Honda and spent my holidays working overtime. The total cost of Jessica's education had been staggering, nearly $200,000 when you factored in tuition, room and board, textbooks, and living expenses. I had depleted my retirement savings, taken out a second mortgage on our house, and worked weekends for 4 solid years to make it happen. After the ceremony, families gathered outside for photos and celebrations. I watched Jessica pose with her friends, all of them laughing and taking selfies, their faces glowing with the excitement of new beginnings. I hung back slightly, not wanting to intrude on their moment, but close enough to capture some candid shots of my daughter's happiness. That's when I heard it. Jessica was standing with 3 of her closest friends from college, Madison, Brooke, and Alyssa, girls I had met numerous times during parent weekends and school events. I had always liked them and thought they were good influences on Jessica. They were discussing their post-graduation plans when Madison mentioned something about meeting parents for dinner. "God, I hope my mom doesn't go overboard with the emotional stuff tonight," Madison laughed. "You know how parents get at these things." "At least your mom has some sense of style," Brooke chimed in. My dad showed up wearing a tie from 1995. That's when Jessica's voice cut through their laughter with words that felt like a physical blow to my chest. "You guys have no idea how lucky you are. My mom is absolutely mortifying. Did you see what she's wearing, that cheap dress from JCPenney and those awful shoes? I've been trying to keep her away from my professors all day because I'm so embarrassed." The girls giggled, but Jessica wasn't finished. "The worst part is how she acts like she's so proud and accomplished. Like, hello, you're a secretary at a drug company. You didn't graduate from Northwestern. I did. But she's going around taking credit like she's the one who earned this degree." My hands started trembling as I stood frozen behind a nearby pillar, my camera hanging uselessly at my side. The dress Jessica was mocking was actually one of my nicest. I had saved for 3 months to buy it specifically for her graduation. Had wanted to look presentable for such an important day. "She keeps talking about how hard she worked to put me through school," Jessica continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "But honestly, isn't that just what parents are supposed to do? She chose to have a kid. It's not like I should be grateful that she did the bare minimum of parental responsibility." Alyssa looked uncomfortable. "Jess, that seems a little harsh. My parents are always talking about how expensive college is." "Please," Jessica scoffed. She loves playing the martyr. "Oh, I worked so hard. I sacrificed so much. It's not like she had anything better to do with her life anyway. At least my success gives her something to brag about to her pathetic coworkers." The cruelty in her voice was unlike anything I had ever heard from my daughter. This wasn't teenage rebellion or momentary frustration. This was genuine contempt. She wasn't just embarrassed by me, she actively resented me. The funniest part, Jessica went on, is that she thinks we're gonna have this close relationship now that I'm graduating. She keeps hinting about me moving back home for a while to save money and spend time together. Like I would ever want to go backward to that boring suburban house with her boring suburban life. I'm moving to Chicago next month, and honestly, I'm hoping she'll finally get the hint and give me some space. Madison raised an eyebrow. You haven't told her about the Chicago plan yet? Are you kidding? She'd probably want to visit every weekend. No, I'm going to wait until the last possible minute to tell her, and then I'll make it clear that I need my independence. Hopefully she'll be too hurt to bother me much. My legs felt weak. The Chicago plan? Jessica had been telling me for months that she was still deciding between several job offers, asking for my advice, letting me believe I was part of her decision-making process. Apparently, she had already made her choice and was deliberately keeping me in the dark. You're terrible, Brooke laughed. But I kind of get it. My mom can be clingy too. It's not just clingy, Jessica said. It's pathetic. She has no life outside of me, no friends, no hobbies, no interests, just work and me. It's suffocating. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my dad had stayed. Maybe she would have developed an actual personality, instead of making me her entire identity. The mention of Jessica's father, the man who had abandoned us both, was the final blow. I had spent 14 years trying to be enough for both of us, working myself to exhaustion, to ensure Jessica never felt the absence of her father, and now she was wishing he had stayed so I would have left her alone. I backed away from the pillar, moving carefully so they wouldn't notice me. My chest felt tight, and I struggled to breathe normally. The woman Jessica was describing, pathetic, boring, clingy, was that really how she saw me? Had our entire relationship been a performance on her part? I found a quiet spot near the parking lot and sat on a bench, trying to process what I had just heard. Around me, other families were celebrating, taking pictures, making plans for dinner. Everyone looked so happy, so proud, so connected. Had they all been living the same lie I had been? My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Mom, where did you go? Ready for our celebration dinner? I stared at the message, remembering her comment about hoping I'd get the hint and give her space. Our celebration dinner, something I had been looking forward to for weeks, was apparently just another obligation she was enduring. I typed back, something came up at work. Emergency. Have dinner with your friends. We'll celebrate later. It wasn't entirely a lie. There was an emergency, just not the kind she would ever understand. Instead of going to the restaurant where I had made reservations weeks ago, I drove home in a daze. Our house in Evanston felt different as I walked through the front door. The living room walls were covered with Jessica's achievements, honor roll certificates, debate team photos, scholarship awards. My entire home had become a shrine to a daughter who...
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Apparently saw me as nothing more than an embarrassing inconvenience. I sat in my kitchen, still wearing the dress Jessica had mocked, and tried to remember when things had changed between us. Had there been signs I had missed? Moments when her politeness had seemed forced, or her gratitude had felt hollow? Looking back, I could see patterns I had chosen to ignore. The way she always seemed relieved when our phone calls ended. How she rarely invited me to campus events, claiming she was too busy, or that parents weren't really encouraged to attend. The careful way she spoke about her friends, never really including me in stories about her college life. I had interpreted her independence as healthy development, her growing distance as natural maturation. I had been proud of raising a daughter who was confident and self-sufficient. But now I wondered if what I had seen as successful parenting had actually been successful manipulation on her part. My laptop was sitting on the kitchen counter, and I opened it with trembling fingers. I needed to understand exactly what I had sacrificed for someone who saw me as a burden. I pulled up my financial records and started calculating the true cost of Jessica's education. The numbers were staggering when laid out in black and white. Over 4 years, I had spent $198,000 on her education. But that was just the beginning. There were the monthly care packages I sent, probably another $3,000 over 4 years. The spring break trips I funded when she claimed all her friends were going and she didn't want to feel left out, $8,000. The laptop, the sorority fees, the emergency car repairs when she had that accident sophomore year, another $5,000. But the real cost wasn't just financial. I calculated the overtime hours I had worked, the weekends I had given up, the social opportunities I had declined because I was either working or saving money for Jessica's expenses. I had worked an average of 60 hours per week for 4 years, sacrificing nearly 3,000 hours of my own life. And for what? So my daughter could stand at her graduation and mock my appearance, my job, my entire existence? I thought about Jessica's comment about me not having friends or hobbies or interests. She was right, but not for the reasons she assumed. I had friends once, colleagues I used to meet for happy hour, neighbors I would chat with on weekends. But as Jessica's expenses grew and my work schedule intensified, I had gradually withdrawn from social activities. It wasn't that I didn't have a personality, it was that I had systematically dismantled my own life to build hers. The Chicago job she had mentioned, I wondered what that involved. I opened her laptop, which she had left behind in her childhood bedroom, and felt only a moment's guilt before clicking on her email. If she could discuss my private business with her friends, surely I was entitled to understand what she was planning. Her inbox revealed months of correspondence I knew nothing about. Job applications, apartment searches, even communication with a boyfriend named Trevor that she had never mentioned to me. She had been building an entire life in secret, deliberately excluding me from every decision. One email chain particularly caught my attention. It was between Jessica and a high-end marketing firm in Chicago, discussing a starting salary of $75,000 per year. The position came with full benefits and a signing bonus. Jessica had already accepted the offer, signed the paperwork, and put down a deposit on a luxury apartment in Lincoln Park. She was financially stable, professionally successful, and completely independent. And according to the overheard conversation, she couldn't wait to cut me out of her life entirely. I closed the laptop and walked upstairs to Jessica's bedroom. It looked exactly like it had when she left for college 4 years ago. Pink walls, stuffed animals on the bed, high school photos tacked to a bulletin board. I had preserved it like a shrine, a monument to the daughter I thought I knew. But the Jessica who had lived in this room was apparently very different from the Jessica who stood in that university courtyard, mocking everything I had done for her. Had she always felt this way? Had she been counting down the days until she could escape her boring suburban life with her pathetic mother? My phone rang, and Jessica's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. "Mom, I hope everything's okay at work. I ended up having dinner with Madison's family. They invited me last minute and I didn't want to be rude. We'll definitely celebrate tomorrow though. Love you." Even her voicemail was a lie. I had seen her planning to avoid me, and yet she was still maintaining the facade of our close relationship. How long had she been this good at deception? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, processing the complete dissolution of everything I believed about my relationship with my daughter. The proudest day of my life had become the day I learned that the person I loved most in the world saw me as an embarrassment. But as the hours passed, something began to shift inside me. The shock and heartbreak were gradually being replaced by something harder and more focused. Anger, yes, but also a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Jessica thought I was pathetic, boring, someone with no life outside of her. She thought I had done the bare minimum of parental responsibility, and that my sacrifices were meaningless. She was planning to cut me out of her life while continuing to benefit from my financial support whenever she needed it. But she had made one crucial miscalculation. She assumed I would continue playing the role of grateful, supportive mother indefinitely, regardless of how she treated me. She had no idea that her pathetic mother was about to show her exactly how much power she had been taking for granted. I had spent 4 years pouring my life into someone who couldn't wait to throw me away. Now it was time to take my life back. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in over 2 years, and drove to downtown Chicago to meet with my financial advisor, Patricia Coleman. Patricia had been managing my investments for nearly a decade, and she knew better than anyone how much I had sacrificed for Jessica's education. "Catherine, you look different today," Patricia observed as I sat down in her office. "How did the graduation go?" "It was enlightening," I said carefully. "Patricia, I need to talk to you about my financial situation and some changes I want to make." I explained that I wanted to stop all financial support for Jessica immediately and redirect that money toward rebuilding my own life. I wanted to understand exactly what I had lost by depleting my retirement savings and what it would take to recover. Patricia pulled up my accounts on her computer, her expression growing more concerned with each screen. "Catherine, I have to be honest with you. Your retirement situation is quite precarious. You've depleted almost all of your long-term savings for Jessica's education. At your current savings rate, you're looking at working until you're 70, maybe older. And if I redirect the money I was spending on Jessica back into retirement savings, well, that would make a significant difference. What were you spending on her annually?" I calculated quickly. Between direct support, care packages, emergencies, and various expenses, probably around $15,000 a year on top of the tuition. $15,000 a year for the next 18 years, with compound interest, could restore your retirement timeline considerably. You could potentially retire at 65 instead of 70 or later. The numbers were stark. Every year I continued supporting Jessica financially was another year I would have to work in my 70s. And for what? So she could continue seeing me as an embarrassment while planning to minimize contact? "There's something else," I told Patricia. "Jessica is planning to move to Chicago next month. She's got a job paying $75,000 a year. But she hasn't told me about it. She's been letting me think she's still deciding on offers and might move back home." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "She's financially independent?" "Completely. She just doesn't want me to know it because then I might expect an actual relationship instead of being her emergency bank." "Catherine," Patricia said gently, "it sounds like you need to have a serious conversation with your daughter about boundaries and expectations." I shook my head. "I think the time for conversation has passed. I need to focus on protecting myself and rebuilding my own life. Can you help me set up a plan that assumes Jessica will never receive another dollar from me?" We spent 2 hours restructuring my finances. It was sobering to see how much ground I needed to make up, but it was also liberating to imagine a future where my financial decisions were based on my own needs rather than Jessica's wants. When I left Patricia's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my own future. For the first time since Jessica started college, I was making plans that had nothing to do with her. My next stop was the Northwestern University Financial Aid Office. I had a specific question, and I wanted to make sure I understood my options completely. The financial aid counselor, a kind woman named Mrs. Roberts, pulled up Jessica's records when I provided the appropriate authorization. "Mrs. Morrison, how can I help you today? I need to understand what happens if a parent withdraws financial support after graduation. Are there any ongoing obligations or commitments I need to be aware of?" Mrs. Roberts looked confused. "For a graduated student?" "No, once the degree is conferred, parental financial responsibility ends entirely. Are you concerned about student loans?" "Jessica doesn't have any student loans. I paid everything out of pocket." "Oh, well then there are absolutely no ongoing obligations. The financial relationship between parent and student ends at graduation." Perfect. I had been worried there might be some legal or institutional expectation of continued support. But Jessica's education was complete and paid for. My obligations were fulfilled. "Mrs. Morrison, may I ask why you're concerned about this? It's unusual for parents to ask about withdrawing support after graduation." I chose my words carefully. "I'm reviewing my financial priorities now that Jessica is launching her independent adult life. I want to make sure I understand all my options." That afternoon, I drove to Jessica's apartment near campus to collect the belongings she had left behind. She was out with friends, celebrating her independence, no doubt, so I let myself in with the spare key she had given me. The apartment was a mess, which didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was finding a stack of credit card bills on her desk. Despite her high-paying job offer, Jessica had apparently been living beyond her means during her final semester. She owed nearly $8,000 across 3 different cards. I also found a folder containing apartment listings in Chicago. The place she had chosen was far more expensive than anything she could afford on her starting salary, even at $75,000 per year. The rent was $2,800 per month, which would be more than half her take-home pay. She was clearly expecting continued financial support from me to maintain her desired lifestyle. As I packed her belongings, I found myself remembering all the times she had called asking for small amounts of money for various emergencies or opportunities. The sorority formal dress that cost $300. The textbooks that, quote, cost more than expected. The spring break trip that everyone else was taking. Each request had seemed reasonable in isolation. But looking at them collectively, I could see the pattern of manipulation. She had learned to present her wants as needs, to make me feel like a good mother for saying yes, and a selfish mother for asking questions. And I had fallen for it every single time. My phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. "Mom, want to meet for lunch tomorrow? I have some exciting news to share with you." The exciting news was probably the Chicago job, the one she had already accepted but was planning to present as a recent development. Even now, she was preparing to manipulate me again, to control the narrative and manage my emotions for her benefit. I deleted the text without responding. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Rachel in California. Rachel and I had been close growing up, but as Jessica's needs had consumed more of my time and attention, I had gradually lost touch with almost everyone in my life. "Catherine!" Rachel's voice was warm with surprise. "It's been months since we talked. How are you? How did Jessica's graduation go?" "That's actually why I'm calling," I said, settling into my living room chair. "I need to tell someone what happened, and I need an outside perspective." I told Rachel everything. The overheard conversation, Jessica's secret job, the years of financial manipulation, the complete picture of deception that had emerged. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of shock or dismay. When I finished, there was a long pause. Finally, Rachel spoke. "Catherine, I have to be honest with you. I've been worried about this dynamic for years." "What do you mean?" "The way you talked about Jessica, the way you organized your entire life around her needs. It wasn't healthy. I tried to bring it up a few times, but you always seemed so defensive about her." I felt a stab of defensiveness even now. I was trying to be a good mother. "You were being a great mother, but you stopped being a person. Every conversation we had was about Jessica's achievements, Jessica's needs, Jessica's future. You disappeared into motherhood so completely that I wasn't sure Catherine Morrison existed anymore." Her words stung because they were true. When had I stopped being Catherine and started being just Jessica's mom? "The thing is," Rachel continued, "Jessica probably picked up on that dynamic. Kids can sense when parents have no identity outside of them, and it often makes them uncomfortable rather than grateful. She might have been pulling away because your devotion felt overwhelming." "So this is my fault?" "No, absolutely not. The way she spoke about you was cruel and ungrateful. I'm just saying that the dynamic you created made it easier for her to take you for granted. She's never had to wonder if you'd be there or worry about earning your support. It was just always guaranteed, regardless of how she treated you." After we hung up, I sat thinking about Rachel's words. She was right. I had lost myself in motherhood. But Jessica was 22 years old now, a college graduate with a professional job. If I didn't reclaim my identity now, when would I ever get the chance? The next morning, I woke up early and drove to the gym I had passed every day for years but never entered. I signed up for a membership and scheduled a session with a personal trainer. If Jessica thought I was boring and had no life outside of her, then it was time to prove her wrong. I also called Northwestern University and asked to speak with someone in the Alumni Relations Department. I explained that I was interested in volunteering for the Parents Network, helping other mothers navigate the financial challenges of putting children through college. "Mrs. Morrison, that's wonderful," the coordinator said. "We have many parents who struggle with setting healthy financial boundaries with their adult children. Your experience could be very valuable." Finally, I made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, who specialized in family dynamics and codependency. If I was going to rebuild my relationship with Jessica, or decide not to, I wanted to do it from a position of strength and clarity rather than hurt and anger. My phone had been buzzing all morning with increasingly urgent texts from Jessica. She was clearly frustrated that I wasn't responding to her invitations, but I wasn't ready to face her until I had a clearer sense of what I wanted to say. Around noon, she finally called. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Mom, what's going on? You've been ignoring my messages all morning. Are you mad about something?" Her voice carried that familiar tone of injured innocence, the one she used when she sensed she was in trouble but wasn't sure why. "Jessica, I think we need to have a conversation. Can you come over this afternoon?" "Of course. Is everything okay? You sound weird. I'll see you at 3. After hanging up, I realized that my hands weren't shaking anymore. The hurt and shock of yesterday had crystallized into something more useful: determination. I was done being the pathetic, boring mother that Jessica was embarrassed by. It was time for both of us to meet the real Catherine Morrison. And I had a feeling she was going to be very different from the woman Jessica thought she knew. At exactly 3 o'clock, I heard Jessica's key in the front door. She called out as she entered, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness she used when she was trying to manage my emotions. "Mom, I'm here. I brought coffee from that place you like." She appeared in the living room carrying 2 cups, looking concerned and slightly wary. I was sitting in the chair by the window, and I gestured for her to take the couch across from me. "Thanks for the coffee," I said, accepting the cup but not drinking from it. "How was your celebration dinner last night?" "It was good. Madison's parents are really nice. I'm sorry again about the work emergency. What happened?" "There was no work emergency, Jessica," I lied. She blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I made up the emergency because I overheard your conversation with your friends after graduation. The one where you called me mortifying and pathetic, and discussed how embarrassed you are by my existence." The color drained from Jessica's face. "Mom, I also know about the job in Chicago that you accepted weeks ago, the apartment you've already put a deposit on, and your plan to avoid telling me until the last minute so you can make it clear that you need your independence." Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she appeared to be completely speechless. "I know you think I'm boring and have no life outside of you. I know you think I did the bare minimum of parental responsibility, and that you shouldn't have to be grateful for my sacrifices. I know you see me as clingy and suffocating and wish your father had stayed so I would have developed an actual personality." With each revelation, Jessica seemed to shrink further into the couch. Her coffee sat untouched in her hands, and she was staring at me with an expression of dawning horror. "I also checked your finances," I continued. "You're carrying $8,000 in credit card debt, and the apartment you chose in Chicago costs more than half your take-home pay. You were clearly expecting me to continue subsidizing your lifestyle, while treating me like an embarrassment you couldn't wait to escape." "Mom, please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, Jessica. You've been very clear about how you see me and what you want from our relationship. The question now is what I'm going to do with that information." I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, where I had placed a folder containing printouts of my financial records. I returned to my chair and opened it. "Over the past 4 years, I have spent $214,000 on your education and lifestyle. I depleted my retirement savings, took out a second mortgage on this house, and worked an average of 60 hours per week to make your college experience possible." Jessica's eyes widened as she processed the number. I also calculated the opportunity cost of those decisions. By redirecting money that should have gone to retirement savings, I have extended my working life by approximately 7 years. I will now have to work until I'm 70 instead of 63. "Mom, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. You never asked. You were too busy enjoying the benefits to consider what they cost me." I pulled out another sheet of paper. I've also made some decisions about the future. Effective immediately, you will receive no further financial support from me. Not for emergencies, not for help with rent, not for anything. You're a college graduate with a $75,000 salary. You are fully capable of supporting yourself. Jessica's face had gone pale. But, Mom, I have debt, and the apartment deposit, and moving expenses. That's not my problem anymore. You made those financial decisions without consulting me, and you can deal with the consequences without my help. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You wanted independence, Jessica. This is what real independence looks like. She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. Mom, I know I said some horrible things, but I was just blowing off steam with my friends. I didn't mean any of it. Which part didn't you mean? The part where you called me mortifying? The part where you said I have no personality? The part where you discussed how eager you are to cut me out of your life? Or maybe the part where you said I should be grateful that my success gives me something to brag about? Jessica flinched with each example. I was being stupid and immature. I was trying to sound cool in front of my friends. By mocking the woman who sacrificed everything to make your success possible? Yes, and I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. It was awful of me, and I know that now. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus strategic damage control. Jessica, let me ask you something. In the past 4 years, how many times have you thanked me for paying your tuition? She looked confused by the question. I don't know. Lots of times. I can tell you exactly. 3 times. Once when you started college, once when you made Dean's List sophomore year, and once last Christmas when you were asking for money for a spring break trip. 3 times in 4 years. I thought you knew I was grateful. How would I know that? You never told me. You never acknowledged the sacrifice. You never asked how I was managing financially, or whether I needed help with anything. Our entire relationship became me giving and you taking, and you seemed to think that was the natural order of things. Jessica was crying now, but I found myself unmoved by her tears. I had cried plenty over the years, when I had to work double shifts to cover her expenses, when I had to cancel plans because I couldn't afford both her needs and my wants, when I realized I had no social life left because every spare moment was devoted to earning money for her education. I can change, she said desperately. I can be better. I can show you how grateful I am. Jessica, you're 22 years old. If you don't understand gratitude and respect by now, it's not something I can teach you. And frankly, I'm done trying. So that's it? You're just gonna cut me off forever because I said some stupid things? I'm not cutting you off. I'm treating you like the independent adult you claim you want to be. You have a college degree I paid for, a job I helped you get by supporting your education, and the skills I spent 22 years helping you develop. You have everything you need to build a successful life. But what about our relationship? What about being family? For the first time since she had arrived, I felt a flicker of my old weakness. The desperate love for my daughter that had driven every decision for the past 14 years. But then I remembered her voice in that courtyard, the casual cruelty with which she had dismissed my entire existence. Jessica, you made it very clear that you don't want a relationship with me. You want a relationship with my bank account. Those are not the same thing. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk, without needing money or help with something? When was the last time you asked about my life, my work, my feelings? When was the last time you treated me like a person rather than a service provider? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. I need you to leave now, I said gently. I have some rebuilding to do, and I need to do it without worrying about your needs or managing your emotions. Mom, please, can't we work this out? Can't we try to fix this? Maybe someday we can have a different kind of relationship. But it will have to be built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not financial dependency and emotional manipulation. And right now, you're not capable of that kind of relationship. Jessica stood up slowly, tears streaming down her face. I love you, Mom. I know I haven't shown it well, but I do love you. I love you too, Jessica. That's why I'm doing this. The dynamic we've had isn't love. It's codependency. I enabled your selfishness, and you took advantage of my desperation for your approval. Neither of us can grow as long as we keep playing those roles." After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time, processing what had just happened. I felt sad, but also something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't have to worry about Jessica's needs, her expenses, her problems. For the first time in decades, I could focus entirely on my own life. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Jessica started college. I cooked myself a nice dinner. Not something quick and cheap, but an actual meal with ingredients I chose because I enjoyed them. I opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion and realized that reclaiming my life was special enough. As I sat at my kitchen table, eating slowly and savoring every bite, I thought about the future. I had 15 years until retirement. 15 years to rebuild my savings, develop hobbies, make friends, travel, fall in love again if I wanted to. 15 years to remember who Catherine Morrison was when she wasn't defined entirely by her role as Jessica's mother. It would be hard. Breaking any addiction was difficult, and I was beginning to understand that my relationship with Jessica had become a kind of addiction, the constant need to give, to fix, to enable, to be needed. But addictions only got worse if you didn't address them. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mom, I'm sorry, I know I hurt you badly. I'm going to find a way to make this right." I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Making things right would require Jessica to fundamentally change her understanding of our relationship and her own sense of entitlement. It would require her to develop empathy, gratitude, and respect that she had never been required to show before. It would require her to grow up. And for the first time in her life, she was going to have to do that growing without my money, my support, or my emotional management smoothing the way. Whether she succeeded or failed was no longer my responsibility. I was finally free to focus on my own growth, my own happiness, my own life. And despite the pain of the past few days, I couldn't wait to see who I would become. 3 weeks had passed since my confrontation with Jessica, and my life had begun to transform in ways I never could have imagined. The silence from her had been complete. No calls, no texts, no attempts to reach out. Part of me had expected her to try harder to repair the damage, but her absence only confirmed what I had suspected. Without the promise of financial support, I held no real value in her life. The mornings felt different now. Instead of waking up with the familiar weight of worry about Jessica's latest crisis or expense, I found myself experiencing something I had almost forgotten: anticipation for my own day. I had started attending a sunrise yoga class at the community center, something I never would have considered when my schedule revolved entirely around earning money for Jessica's needs. My first session with Dr. Sarah Kim had been more revealing than I expected. She had listened to my story with a kind of professional neutrality that somehow made the betrayal feel less personal and more like a case study in dysfunctional family dynamics. "Catherine," she had said during our second session, "what you're describing is a classic example of enmeshment. You became so focused on Jessica's success that you lost your own identity entirely. The relationship became transactional rather than emotional. But I did it because I loved her," I had protested. Love and enabling are not the same thing. In fact, excessive enabling often prevents the other person from developing crucial life skills. By always rescuing Jessica from consequences, you may have inadvertently stunted her emotional development. Those words had stung, but they also felt liberating. For years, I had carried guilt about whether I was doing enough for Jessica, giving enough, sacrificing enough. The possibility that I had actually given too much, that my generosity had been harmful rather than helpful, reframed everything. My sister Rachel had become a regular phone companion again, and through our conversations, I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been dormant for years. We talked about books, politics, travel destinations, and shared memories from our childhood. For the first time in decades, I was having conversations that had nothing to do with Jessica's needs or achievements. "You sound like yourself again," Rachel had observed during our most recent call. I can hear Catherine in your voice, not just Jessica's mom. The comment had made me realize how long it had been since anyone, including myself, had seen me as a complete person rather than an extension of my daughter. My work life had also begun to shift. Without the constant pressure to maximize my income for Jessica's expenses, I had started declining overtime opportunities and using my vacation days for the first time in years. My colleagues had noticed the change immediately. "Catherine, you seem different lately," my supervisor, Margaret Chen, had commented. "More relaxed, maybe?" I had simply smiled and said I was focusing more on work-life balance. But the truth was more complex. For the first time since Jessica started college, I could make decisions based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. The financial freedom was intoxicating. My first paycheck after cutting off Jessica's support had felt like winning the lottery. Instead of immediately calculating how much I could send her or what emergency expenses might arise, I had deposited the entire amount into my own accounts. The sensation of financial autonomy after years of financial martyrdom was almost overwhelming. I had started small with my newfound freedom. A massage at the spa I had driven past for years but never entered. A cooking class that met on Thursday evenings. New clothes that I chose based on what I liked rather than what was cheapest. Each purchase felt like a small act of rebellion against the person I had been for the past 4 years. But the most significant change was psychological. The constant low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years, worry about Jessica's grades, her social life, her expenses, her future, had simply vanished. I slept through the night for the first time in months. My stomach no longer clenched every time my phone rang, wondering what crisis Jessica needed me to solve. The volunteer work at Northwestern had proven particularly rewarding. I had joined a support group for parents struggling with financial boundaries, and hearing other stories had helped me understand that my situation wasn't unique. There was even a term for what I had experienced: financial abuse by adult children, and learning that it was a recognized phenomenon helped diminish the shame I felt about being manipulated. The hardest part, explained Dr. Martinez, the counselor who facilitated our group, is that these adult children often genuinely believe they're entitled to their parents' resources. They've never learned to associate money with effort or sacrifice. One woman in the group, Linda, had shared a story remarkably similar to mine. Her son had graduated from medical school with her financial support, then immediately moved across the country and rarely contacted her except when he needed money for various investments or emergencies. The worst part, Linda had confided, was realizing that he saw me as an ATM with emotions. He knew exactly which buttons to push to make me feel guilty. It's enough to send money. These conversations had helped me understand that Jessica's sense of entitlement wasn't necessarily a reflection of poor parenting on my part, but rather a predictable result of never having to face real consequences for her choices. I had been so afraid of her struggling that I had prevented her from learning resilience. My physical health had also improved dramatically. The chronic headaches I had attributed to stress at work had disappeared entirely. My blood pressure, which had been borderline high for months, had returned to normal ranges. Even my skin looked better. Apparently, financial anxiety had been taking a physical toll I hadn't fully recognized. The gym membership I had purchased in a moment of defiance had become a genuine source of joy. My trainer, Marcus, was a patient man in his 30s who specialized in working with women who were starting fitness routines later in life. The goal isn't to become someone different, he had explained during our first session. It's to become the strongest version of who you already are. That philosophy had resonated far beyond our workout sessions. In every area of my life, I was discovering that I didn't need to reinvent myself completely. I just needed to remember who I had been before I lost myself in motherhood. The social aspects of the gym had been unexpected but welcome. I had started joining a group of women who met for coffee after the morning yoga classes, and through them I was slowly rebuilding a social network that existed entirely independent of Jessica. "You should come to book club next week," suggested Diane, a retired teacher who had become something of a mentor figure in the group. "We're reading Educated by Tara Westover. It's about family dysfunction and breaking cycles of emotional abuse." The invitation had felt like a small miracle. When was the last time someone had invited me to something that had nothing to do with Jessica's achievements or needs? My house had begun to reflect these changes as well. I had removed many of the photos and awards that had turned my living space into a shrine to Jessica's accomplishments. In their place, I had hung artwork I genuinely enjoyed and displayed books I was reading. The guest room that had been preserved as Jessica's childhood sanctuary was slowly being converted into a proper office space where I could pursue some freelance writing opportunities I had always been too busy to consider. The financial planning sessions with Patricia had become exercises in possibilities rather than damage control. We had calculated that if I maintained my current savings rate, the rate that was now possible without Jessica's expenses, I could actually retire earlier than originally planned, possibly at 62 instead of 70. You could even consider some travel, Patricia had suggested during our most recent meeting. When was the last time you took a real vacation? I had to think for several minutes before I could remember. It had been at least 8 years, maybe longer. Every potential vacation had been redirected toward Jessica's needs. Summer programs, study abroad opportunities, or simply covering her living expenses so she could focus on academics rather than working. The idea of traveling for my own pleasure felt almost decadent. Where would I go? What would I want to see? For so long, my dreams had been entirely focused on Jessica's future that I had stopped imagining my own. Dr. Kim had been helping me explore these questions in our sessions. She had given me an assignment that felt simultaneously simple and impossible. Make a list of things I wanted to do that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother. The exercise had been harder than I expected. My identity had been so thoroughly subsumed into motherhood that identifying my own desires felt like speaking a foreign language. But slowly, tentatively, I had begun to compile possibilities. Learn to paint, visit art museums in Europe, take a cooking class in Italy, learn to play piano again. I had been quite good as a teenager, but had sold my piano years ago to help pay for Jessica's high school expenses. Each item on the list felt like a small act of rebellion against the woman I had been for so many years. My relationship with money had also fundamentally shifted. For the first time in decades, I was making financial decisions based on my own values, rather than external pressures. I had donated to charities I cared about, bought organic groceries without calculating the cost difference, and even hired a house cleaner to come twice a month. A luxury I had always dismissed as unnecessary when I could use that money for Jessica instead. The house cleaner, Maria, was a cheerful woman in her 40s who treated her work with obvious pride. Watching her efficient, professional approach to maintaining my home had made me realize how much time and energy I had been spending on tasks that brought me no joy. That time could now be redirected toward activities that actually enriched my life. The silence from Jessica continued, but its meaning had evolved in my mind. Initially, I had interpreted her absence as evidence that she truly didn't value our relationship beyond its financial benefits. But as weeks passed, I began to wonder if she might actually be processing the confrontation more seriously than I had expected. Rachel had offered a different perspective during one of our conversations. Maybe she's struggling to figure out how to rebuild the relationship on different terms, she had suggested. If she's used to interacting with you as a provider rather than a person, she might not know how to start over. The possibility that Jessica might be experiencing genuine confusion rather than simple indifference was both hopeful and heartbreaking. But I had also learned from Dr. Kim that my desire to fix Jessica's emotional problems was part of the same pattern that had gotten us into this situation in the first place. Your job isn't to manage Jessica's emotional development, Dr. Kim had reminded me. She's an adult. If she wants to repair this relationship, she needs to figure out how to do that herself. The wisdom of this advice was becoming clearer with each passing day. For years, I had anticipated Jessica's needs, solved her problems before she even recognized them, and cushioned her from every consequence. The result had been a 22-year-old who had never learned to navigate complex emotional situations independently. If Jessica wanted to rebuild our relationship, she would need to develop skills she had never been required to use before: empathy, accountability, genuine communication, and the ability to offer emotional support rather than just receive it. These weren't skills I could teach her at this point. They were lessons she would have to learn through experience. My evenings had become a source of particular pleasure. Instead of spending them worrying about Jessica's latest drama or working extra hours to cover her expenses, I was reading novels, watching documentaries, and pursuing online courses in subjects that interested me. I had enrolled in a series about art history and found myself fascinated by periods and movements I had never had time to explore. The cooking classes had proven especially rewarding. Learning to prepare elaborate meals for my own enjoyment felt wonderfully indulgent after years of subsisting on whatever was quickest and cheapest. Our instructor, Chef Roberto, encouraged us to think of cooking as a form of self-care rather than just a necessity. When you cook for yourself with love and attention, he had explained, you're sending yourself the message that you deserve good things. This philosophy had become something of a guiding principle in my new life. After years of believing that my own needs were secondary to Jessica's, I was slowly learning to prioritize my own well-being without guilt. The members of my parents' support group had become an unexpected source of friendship and wisdom. Linda, whose son had treated her similarly to how Jessica had treated me, had made remarkable progress in establishing boundaries with her children. The key, she had shared during a recent meeting, was realizing that I wasn't helping them by always rescuing them. I was actually preventing them from becoming competent adults. Another group member, Robert, had cut off financial support to his daughter 3 years earlier. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, he had admitted, but she's actually more successful now than she ever was when I was supporting her. She had to learn to budget, to prioritize, to make tough choices. Those are life skills I should have required her to develop years earlier. These stories had reinforced my growing conviction that my decision to stop enabling Jessica wasn't cruel. It was overdue. At 22, she was older than I had been when I became a single mother, and took full responsibility for both our lives. There was no reason she couldn't handle the same level of independence I had managed at her age. My work colleagues had also begun to see me differently, as I stopped volunteering for every overtime opportunity, and started leaving the office at reasonable hours. Margaret Chen had actually complimented my improved efficiency, noting that I seemed more focused during regular work hours. When you're not exhausted from overwork, she had observed, your productivity during normal hours actually increases. This feedback had made me realize how much my constant financial stress had been affecting my professional performance. The mental energy I had been spending on worry about Jessica's expenses was now available for creative problem-solving and strategic thinking at work. I had even begun to consider whether I wanted to pursue some of the advancement opportunities I had always declined due to time constraints. A senior position had opened up in our department, and for the first time in years, I was seriously considering applying. The additional responsibility would be challenging, but without Jessica's financial demands, I could afford to take professional risks again. The physical changes in my appearance had been another unexpected benefit of my new lifestyle. Regular exercise, better nutrition, adequate sleep, and reduced stress had combined to make me look and feel younger than I had in years. Several people had commented that I seemed to be glowing, or asked if I had done something different with my hair. The truth was simpler. I was no longer carrying the weight of someone else's problems on my shoulders, and the relief was visible. My wardrobe had also begun to evolve as I purchased clothes based on what I enjoyed wearing, rather than what was most practical or affordable. I had bought a beautiful dress for the art museum gala I had decided to attend, the first formal event I had chosen to go to in years that wasn't related to Jessica's achievements. The gala had been a revelation. Surrounded by people who shared my interests in art and culture, I had rediscovered how much I enjoyed intellectual conversations with peers. Several people had asked for my contact information, and I was slowly building a social network of adults who knew nothing about my history as an overgiving mother. Dr. Kim had praised this development during our most recent session. You're creating an identity that exists independently of your relationship with Jessica, she had observed. That's crucial for your long-term emotional health. The volunteer work at Northwestern had also provided opportunities to help other parents avoid the mistakes I had made. When I shared my story with newly enrolled families, I emphasized the importance of maintaining clear financial boundaries and preserving their own identities outside of their children's achievements. Your child's success is not your success, I would tell them, and your child's problems are not your emergencies. The sooner you establish those boundaries, the healthier your relationship will be in the long term. Some parents seemed receptive to this message, while others looked at me with the same polite skepticism I probably would have shown anyone who had tried to warn me 4 years earlier. I understood their resistance. When you're in the middle of sacrificing everything for your child's future, any suggestion that you might be doing too much feels like an attack on your love for them. But I had learned that love and boundaries weren't opposites. They were complementary. The most loving thing I could have done for Jessica was to require her to develop independence and appreciation for others' sacrifices. By constantly rescuing her from consequences, I had actually deprived her of opportunities to grow. My financial advisor Patricia had introduced me to some investment opportunities that I never would have considered when every spare dollar was earmarked for Jessica's needs. We were exploring options for building long-term wealth rather than just covering immediate expenses. "You have 15 years until retirement," Patricia had explained. "That's enough time to build real financial security if we're strategic about it." The possibility of actual financial security, rather than just survival, felt almost too good to believe. For so many years, I had lived paycheck to paycheck despite earning a decent salary, because Jessica's expenses had consumed every extra dollar. Now, for the first time since she started college, I could think about building wealth rather than just managing debt. I had also started researching travel opportunities for the following year. The idea of taking a real vacation, not a quick weekend trip built around Jessica's schedule, but a genuine adventure chosen entirely for my own pleasure, was both thrilling and terrifying. Where did I want to go? What did I want to see? These questions had been irrelevant for so long that I felt like I was learning a new language. The cooking class had inspired an interest in culinary travel. I found myself reading about food tours in Italy, cooking schools in France, and wine regions in California. The idea of combining learning with travel appealed to the part of me that had always loved education but had never had the opportunity to pursue it for pure enjoyment. My relationship with my house had also transformed. Instead of seeing it as a burden that required expensive maintenance, I was beginning to view it as an asset that could support my future goals. Patricia had suggested that I could use the equity to fund travel or even purchase a smaller home that would be easier to maintain in retirement. "You have options now," she had emphasized. Financial flexibility creates life flexibility. This concept of having options felt revolutionary after years of feeling trapped by financial obligations to Jessica. Every decision had been constrained by her needs, her timeline, her priorities. Now I could make choices based on what would make me happy and fulfilled. The support group had also introduced me to resources I hadn't known existed. There were workshops on financial planning for single women, support groups for parents dealing with adult children's entitlement, and even social groups for women rebuilding their identities after major life transitions. I had signed up for a weekend workshop called Rediscovering Yourself After Codependency, and was surprised by how many women my age were dealing with similar situations. Some had overgiven to partners, others to adult children, but the pattern was remarkably consistent: intelligent, capable women who had lost themselves in caring for others. "The hardest part," one workshop participant had shared, "is forgiving yourself for allowing it to happen in the first place." This sentiment had resonated deeply with me. I still struggled with guilt about the choices I had made, the boundaries I had failed to set, the enabling I had disguised as love. But Dr. Kim had helped me understand that self-forgiveness was essential for moving forward. "You made those choices based on the information and emotional skills you had at the time," she had reminded me. "Beating yourself up about the past prevents you from making better choices in the future." The photography class one had enrolled in was teaching me to see beauty in everyday moments, something I had forgotten how to do during the years when every experience was filtered through worry about Jessica's needs. Learning to capture images that pleased me aesthetically, regardless of their significance to anyone else, felt like a metaphor for reclaiming my own perspective on life. My instructor, Sarah, was a professional photographer who specialized in teaching older adults who were discovering creative pursuits later in life. "It's never too late to develop an artistic eye," she had assured our class. In fact, life experience often enhances creativity rather than limiting it. This philosophy had become another guiding principle in my transformation. Instead of viewing my age as a limitation, I was learning to see it as an advantage. I had decades of experience, hard-won wisdom, and finally the financial freedom to pursue interests that had been postponed for years. The silence from Jessica was now approaching a full month, And while I still felt occasional pangs of sadness about our estrangement, I no longer felt the desperate urge to reach out and fix the situation. Dr. Kim had helped me understand that my need to repair our relationship immediately was another manifestation of the same controlling behavior that had created the problem in the first place. Jessica needs time to process what happened and decide how she wants to respond, Dr. Kim had explained. If you rescue her from the discomfort of that process, you'll be repeating the same pattern that got you here. This waiting was difficult, but it was also educational. I was learning to tolerate uncertainty, to sit with uncomfortable emotions without immediately acting to resolve them. These were skills I had never developed because I had always been too busy managing everyone else's emotions to examine my own. The book club Diane had invited me to join had become a highlight of my weeks. Reading and discussing literature with a group of thoughtful, well-read women was intellectually stimulating in a way I had forgotten to crave. Our current selection, Educated, by Tara Westover, had sparked particularly meaningful conversations about family loyalty, the cost of independence, and the difference between love and control. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, one member had observed during our discussion, is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction, even when they interpret that refusal as abandonment. These words had felt like a direct message from the universe, confirming that my decision to stop supporting Jessica financially was an act of love rather than punishment. My evenings were now filled with activities that nourished my soul rather than drained my energy. I read novels that transported me to different worlds, watched documentaries that expanded my understanding of history and culture, and worked on photography projects that challenged me to see familiar surroundings with fresh eyes. The woman I was becoming felt both familiar and new, like rediscovering a friend I had lost touch with years ago. She was confident, curious, creative, and capable of making decisions based on her own desires rather than external pressures. She was someone I actually enjoyed spending time with, someone whose company I had missed without realizing it. And for the first time in years, I was excited to see what she would do next. 6 months had passed since that devastating conversation in my living room, and the transformation in my life had been so complete that I sometimes barely recognized the woman I used to be. The anxious, depleted mother who had defined herself entirely through her daughter's achievements felt like a character from someone else's story. In her place stood Catherine Morrison, a woman I was genuinely excited to be. The morning started, like most others now, with my alarm set for 6:30 rather than the 5:15 that had been necessary when I worked constant overtime. I had developed a routine that felt luxurious in its simplicity. Coffee in my favorite mug while reading the newspaper, a proper breakfast instead of grabbing something quick on my way out the door, and time to actually enjoy the sunrise through my kitchen window. My house had been transformed over these months into a space that displayed artwork I had collected from local galleries, photographs I had taken in my photography class, and books that represented my expanding interests in history, art, and travel. The guest room had been completely converted into a combination office and art studio, with proper lighting for the oil painting classes I had started taking. The financial freedom continued to feel almost surreal. My latest bank statement showed a savings account balance that had grown more in 6 months than it had in the previous 4 years combined. Patricia and I had been meeting monthly to discuss investment strategies and retirement planning, and the projections were remarkably optimistic. At this rate, she had told me during our most recent session, you could potentially retire at 60 with a very comfortable nest egg. Have you given any thought to what you might want to do with that kind of freedom? The question had sparked weeks of delicious contemplation. Early retirement would open possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. Extended travel, volunteer work with causes I cared about, perhaps even returning to school to pursue subjects that had always interested me, but seemed impractical when every decision had to be made through the lens of financial survival. My social life had also flourished beyond anything I could have imagined. The book club had led to dinner invitations, which had led to theater subscriptions, which had led to weekend trips to art museums in neighboring cities. I had rediscovered the pleasure of female friendship, not the superficial connections I had maintained with other mothers during Jessica's school years, but genuine relationships based on shared interests and mutual enjoyment of each other's company. Diane had become particularly close friend, and our conversations often revolved around the theme of reinvention in middle age. She had gone through her own period of rediscovering her identity after her children left home, and her insights had been invaluable during my own transformation. The hardest part, she had confided over lunch the previous week, is learning to trust your own judgment again. When you've spent years making every decision based on someone else's needs, it takes time to remember what you actually want. This observation had captured something essential about my journey. For months, I had second-guessed every choice I made for myself, wondering if I was being selfish or irresponsible. It had taken conscious effort to silence the voice in my head that questioned whether I deserved to spend money on my own happiness, or whether I should be saving every penny in case Jessica needed help. Dr. Kim had been instrumental in helping me understand that this internal resistance was normal and expected. "You're rewiring thought patterns that have been in place for decades," she had explained. "It's natural for your old programming to resurface, especially when you're doing something that would have been impossible under your previous system." The therapy sessions had evolved from crisis management to genuine personal growth. We were exploring questions about my future that went far beyond my relationship with Jessica. What kind of work brought me satisfaction? What environments made me feel most alive? What kinds of relationships did I want to cultivate? These were questions I had never had the luxury of considering when my entire existence had been organized around someone else's needs. My work life had undergone its own transformation. I had applied for and received the promotion to senior analyst, which came with both increased responsibility and a significant salary increase. The additional income felt like winning the lottery, since it represented money that would benefit me directly, rather than disappearing into someone else's expenses. More importantly, the new position had challenged me intellectually in ways I had forgotten were possible. I was working on projects that required strategic thinking, creative problem-solving, and collaboration with colleagues who respected my expertise. For the first time in years, I was receiving recognition for my professional abilities rather than just my willingness to work excessive hours. My supervisor, Margaret, had pulled me aside the previous month to discuss my remarkable transformation. "I don't know what changes you've made in your personal life," she had said, "but the difference in your work performance has been extraordinary. You seem more focused, more creative, more confident. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." The irony wasn't lost on me that removing stress from my personal life had actually made me more successful professionally. The mental energy I had been spending on worry about Jessica's finances and future was now available for advancing my own career. The volunteer work at Northwestern had also evolved into something more substantial. I had been invited to join the advisory board for the Parents' Financial Literacy Program, helping to develop workshops that would teach other families how to set healthy financial boundaries with their adult children. "Your story has resonated with so many parents," the program coordinator had told me. "Would you be willing to speak at our next seminar?" I think hearing from someone who has successfully navigated this transition could be incredibly valuable. The idea of speaking publicly about my experience had initially felt terrifying, but as I considered it, I realized it might also be healing. If sharing my story could help even one family avoid the mistakes I had made, the vulnerability would be worthwhile. My relationship with money had fundamentally shifted from scarcity to abundance thinking. Instead of constantly calculating what I couldn't afford, I was learning to make decisions based on what would bring me joy and fulfillment. This didn't mean spending recklessly, quite the opposite. With clear financial goals and no external pressures, I was actually making much more thoughtful purchasing decisions. I had bought a beautiful piece of original artwork from a local artist, something I never would have considered when every spare dollar went to Jessica's expenses. The painting brought me daily pleasure and supported someone in my community whose work I admired. These kinds of purchases, investments in beauty, creativity, and local community, felt deeply satisfying in a way that paying for Jessica's latest crisis never had. The travel planning had become one of my favorite evening activities. I had booked a 2-week trip to Italy for the following spring, focusing on the culinary regions I had learned about in my cooking classes. The itinerary included cooking workshops in Tuscany, wine tastings in Chianti, and art tours in Florence. Experiences I had chosen based purely on what excited me rather than what was most economical or practical. Booking this trip had felt like the ultimate act of self-determination. For years, Any discretionary spending had been viewed through the lens of whether that money might be better saved for Jessica's needs. Now I was planning an expensive, indulgent vacation simply because it would make me happy. The photography hobby had developed into something approaching a passion. I had upgraded my camera equipment and was taking weekend trips to capture landscapes and architecture that appealed to me. Some of my images had been good enough to display in local galleries, and I was even earning occasional income from stock photography sales. This creative outlet had filled a part of my soul that I hadn't realized was empty. The process of seeing the world through the camera lens, looking for interesting compositions and capturing moments of beauty, had taught me to pay attention to my environment in ways I had forgotten during the years when I moved through life focused entirely on problem-solving and financial management. My physical health had continued to improve dramatically. The regular exercise, better nutrition, and absence of chronic stress had combined to make me feel younger and more energetic than I had in decades. My doctor had commented on my improved blood pressure and overall vitality during my most recent checkup. "Whatever lifestyle changes you've made," she had observed, "they're working remarkably well. You look like a different person than the woman I saw a year ago." The transformation wasn't just physical. It was radiating from an inner sense of well-being that came from finally living in alignment with my own values and priorities. My evenings had become a source of genuine pleasure rather than exhausted collapse. I was reading voraciously, working on photography projects, practicing piano on the beautiful upright I had purchased to replace the one I had sold years ago, and sometimes simply sitting in my garden with a glass of wine, enjoying the peace of not having to worry about anyone else's problems. The silence from Jessica had stretched into months now, but its emotional impact on me had evolved significantly. Initially, I had experienced waves of sadness and doubt about my decision. Had I been too harsh? Was I destroying our relationship permanently? Should I reach out to see how she was managing? But as time passed and my own life became increasingly fulfilling, Jessica's absence felt less like a loss and more like space. Space to discover who I was when I wasn't managing someone else's emotions. Space to pursue interests that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother. Space to build relationships with people who valued me for my own qualities, rather than what I could provide for them. Dr. Kim had helped me understand that this emotional evolution was a sign of healthy growth rather than callousness. "You're developing what we call differentiation," she had explained. "The ability to love someone while not being controlled by their choices or emotions. It's actually the foundation of healthy relationships." The support group had provided numerous examples of other parents who had gone through similar periods of estrangement after setting boundaries with adult children. Some of those relationships had eventually been rebuilt on healthier foundations, while others had remained distant but civil. In a few cases, the adult children had never been able to accept the new dynamic and had chosen to maintain the distance permanently. "The outcome isn't entirely up to you," Linda had shared during a recent meeting. "You can control your own behavior and choices, but you can't control how your adult child responds to healthy boundaries. Some of them learn and grow from the experience, and others don't." This wisdom had been both sobering and liberating. I was finally accepting that I couldn't force Jessica to become the grateful, empathetic daughter I had hoped to raise. I could only control my own actions and choices, and those choices had led to a life that was more fulfilling than anything I had experienced in years. My relationship with my extended family had also improved, as I became more emotionally available for connections that weren't focused on Jessica's drama. Rachel and I had planned a sisters' trip to visit our elderly aunt in Maine, something we had talked about for years but never arranged, because I had always been too busy managing Jessica's latest crisis. "It's wonderful to have my sister back," Rachel had told me during one of our regular phone calls. For years it felt like I was talking to Jessica's mother, rather than Catherine. "Now you sound like yourself again." These observations from people who had known me before I lost myself in overgiving had been particularly validating. They confirmed that my transformation wasn't just my imagination. I was genuinely becoming a more complete, authentic version of myself. The art classes had introduced me to a community of creative adults who were pursuing their passions later in life. Many of them had stories similar to mine, years of putting their own interests aside for family obligations, followed by a period of rediscovery and renewal. These connections had helped normalize my experience and provided inspiration for what was possible in the years ahead. I started painting at 55, one of my classmates had shared, And now, 10 years later, I'm having my first solo gallery show. It's never too late to discover hidden talents or develop new skills. The idea that my 50s and 60s could be a time of growth and discovery rather than decline and limitation had become a central theme in my thinking about the future. Instead of viewing my age as a constraint, I was learning to see it as an advantage, the wisdom and financial stability to pursue interests purely for their own sake, without the pressure of building a career or supporting dependents. My home had become a reflection of this new perspective. I had redecorated with colors and furniture that pleased me aesthetically rather than what was most practical or child-friendly. The result was a space that felt sophisticated and peaceful, somewhere I genuinely enjoyed spending time, rather than just a place to collapse after work. The garden had received particular attention, and I discovered an unexpected passion for landscape design. Working with plants and creating beautiful outdoor spaces provided a satisfying combination of creativity, physical activity, and long-term planning. Watching flowers I had planted bloom months later provided a metaphor for the patience required in personal growth. My wardrobe had also evolved to reflect my new life. Instead of buying clothes based purely on utility and budget, I was choosing pieces that made me feel confident and attractive. The investment in quality rather than quantity had actually proven more economical, as I was buying fewer items but enjoying them more and wearing them longer. The financial planning sessions with Patricia had become increasingly exciting as we explored possibilities that would have been impossible under my previous circumstances. We were discussing strategies for early retirement, investment properties, and even the possibility of starting a small business related to my photography or consulting work with families struggling with financial boundaries. "You have so many options now," Patricia had observed during our most recent meeting. "Financial freedom creates life freedom in ways that people who have never experienced financial stress often take for granted." This comment had made me reflect on how much energy I had spent during the years of supporting Jessica, not just the money itself, but the mental and emotional energy of constant financial worry. Without that burden, I had discovered reserves of creativity and enthusiasm that I had forgotten I possessed. The speaking engagement at Northwestern had gone better than I had dared to hope. Standing in front of a room full of parents and sharing my story had been emotionally challenging but ultimately empowering. Several people had approached me afterward to thank me for my honesty and to share their own struggles with similar situations. One mother had stayed after the presentation to talk privately. "I've been supporting my 25-year-old son financially for 3 years since he graduated," she had confided. "He lives in an expensive apartment I pay for and calls me whenever he runs out of money for food or entertainment. Your story made me realize that I'm not helping him. I'm preventing him from learning to manage his own life." These conversations had reinforced my growing conviction that my experience with Jessica, while painful, had taught me valuable lessons that could benefit other families. The idea of developing this into more formal consulting or workshop facilitation was beginning to appeal to me as a meaningful way to use my experience constructively. My creative pursuits had also begun generating unexpected opportunities. A local gallery had asked to display some of my photography in a group show featuring emerging artists over 50. The validation of having my work considered worthy of public display had been profoundly satisfying, reminding me that I had talents and perspectives that existed entirely independent of my role as anyone's mother. The piano lessons had progressed to the point where I could play pieces I had loved as a teenager but had never had time to master. Spending evening hours working through complex compositions provided a meditative quality that helped me process the emotional complexities of my transformation. Music had always been important to me, but during the years of focusing on Jessica's needs, I had lost touch with that part of myself. Rediscovering it felt like being reunited with an old friend who accepted me exactly as I was and asked nothing of me except the pleasure of shared experience. My relationship with work had also stabilized into something sustainable and satisfying. The promotion had brought challenges that engaged my intellect without overwhelming my personal life. I was able to contribute meaningfully to projects I cared about, while maintaining the work-life balance that had become essential to my well-being. Several colleagues had commented on the change in my demeanor and effectiveness. Without the constant distraction of financial worry about Jessica's expenses, I was able to focus completely during work hours, and then leave those responsibilities at the office when I went home. The book club had introduced me to literature I might never have discovered on my own, and our discussions had challenged me to think about complex themes in new ways. The intellectual stimulation of analyzing literature with thoughtful, well-read women had filled a need I hadn't realized I had for substantive conversation about ideas, rather than just practical concerns. Our current selection was A Man Called Ove by Frederick Backman, and the discussions about the protagonist's journey from isolation to connection had resonated deeply with my own experience of rebuilding social relationships after years of focusing solely on family obligations. The volunteer work had expanded beyond Northwestern to include literacy tutoring at the local library and occasional photography workshops for seniors interested in learning new skills. These activities provided a sense of purpose and community contribution that felt meaningful in ways that writing checks for Jessica's expenses never had. Helping other people develop skills or overcome challenges through my own knowledge and experience was deeply satisfying. It reminded me that I had value to offer the world that went far beyond my ability to provide financial support to family members. My relationship with my house had evolved from seeing it as a burden requiring expensive maintenance to viewing it as an asset that could support my future goals. Patricia and I had discussed options for downsizing to a smaller, more manageable property in a few years, which would free up additional resources for travel and other pursuits. But for now, I was enjoying the process of making the current house truly mine, decorating according to my preferences, creating spaces that supported my hobbies and interests, and maintaining it at a level that pleased me rather than stressing about every expense. The travel planning had become increasingly sophisticated as I learned more about what kinds of experiences I most enjoyed. The Italy trip was just the beginning. I was already researching possibilities for visiting art museums in Russia, taking cooking classes in Thailand, and even going on a photography safari in Kenya. These dreams felt simultaneously extravagant and completely reasonable. I had the financial resources, the time, and the physical health to pursue ambitious travel goals. More importantly, I had finally given myself permission to spend money on experiences that would enrich my life, rather than constantly deferring my own pleasure for someone else's benefit. The silence from Jessica had now lasted 8 months, but my emotional response to it had shifted dramatically. Instead of anxious waiting for contact or guilty second-guessing of my decision, I found myself feeling genuinely curious about what she was learning from the experience of complete financial independence. Was she managing her budget successfully? Had she found ways to pay off her credit card debt? Was she developing the life skills that I had inadvertently prevented her from learning by always solving her problems for her? These questions arose from interest rather than worry. I no longer felt responsible for Jessica's success or failure in managing her adult life. She had received an excellent education, numerous advantages, and every tool she needed to build a successful, independent life. What she did with those resources was now entirely up to her. Dr. Kim had helped me understand that this emotional detachment wasn't indifference, it was healthy differentiation. You can love Jessica and wish her well without being enmeshed in her daily struggles, she had explained. In fact, that kind of love is often more beneficial for adult children than the hovering, rescuing kind of love you used to provide. The support group had provided numerous examples of how adult children had responded to their parents' boundary setting over time. Some had initially reacted with anger and withdrawal, as Jessica had, but had eventually returned to rebuild the relationship on healthier terms. Others had required years to develop the emotional maturity necessary for genuine reciprocal relationships with their parents. The timeline isn't up to you, Robert had reminded the group during a recent meeting. Your job is to maintain healthy boundaries and be open to reconnection if and when your adult child is ready for a different kind of relationship. This perspective had been liberating because it removed the pressure I had been putting on myself to somehow fix the situation with Jessica. I couldn't control her choices or accelerate her emotional development. I could only continue building a fulfilling life for myself and remain open to the possibility of future reconciliation on terms that would be healthy for both of us. My morning routine had become a cherished part of each day. Coffee in my favorite mug, reading the newspaper without rushing, perhaps some gentle stretching or meditation before beginning the day's activities. This quiet time for myself had been impossible during the years when I started each day worrying about Jessica's latest crisis, or working overtime to cover her expenses. The simple pleasure of having time to think my own thoughts and set my own priorities for the day had become a daily reminder of how much my life had improved since I stopped organizing everything around someone else's needs. On this particular morning, as I sat in my kitchen enjoying the early sunlight and planning my day, a photography walk in the afternoon, dinner with friends from book club in the evening, I realized that I had finally answered the question that had haunted me for months after the confrontation with Jessica. The question had been whether I was being selfish or cruel by withdrawing financial support from my daughter. The answer, I now understood, was that I had been neither selfish nor cruel. I had been necessary. Jessica had needed to learn that relationships required mutual respect, that money came from effort and sacrifice, and that taking advantage of someone's love had consequences. These were lessons I couldn't teach her through lectures or gentle guidance. They could only be learned through experience. Whether she would learn them successfully wasn't up to me. My job had been to stop enabling the behavior that prevented her growth, not to manage her response to that change. As I finished my coffee and prepared to start another day in the life I had built for myself, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment with my own choices. I was living according to my own values, pursuing my own interests, and building relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It had taken losing my relationship with Jessica to discover who Catherine Morrison actually was, when she wasn't defined entirely by motherhood. The woman I had found was someone I genuinely liked and respected, someone who deserved the good life she was finally learning to create. And for the first time in decades, I was excited to see what that woman would accomplish next. The doorbell rang, interrupting my peaceful morning reflection. I glanced at the clock, 8:30, earlier than most visitors typically arrived. Through the front window, I could see a familiar figure standing on my porch, looking nervous and uncertain. It was Jessica. She was holding what appeared to be a letter in her hands, and her usual confident posture was replaced by something that looked almost like humility. For a moment, I felt the old familiar surge of maternal concern and the impulse to rush to the door to see what she needed. But then I remembered the woman I had become over these months. Someone who made thoughtful decisions rather than reactive ones. Someone who maintained boundaries even when they felt uncomfortable. Someone who valued herself enough to proceed carefully in situations that had previously caused her pain. I walked slowly to the front door, pausing to center myself before opening it. Whatever Jessica had come to say, I would listen. But I would listen as Catherine Morrison, a woman who had learned to value herself, rather than as the depleted, grateful mother who had been so easily manipulated before. The conversation we were about to have would determine whether our relationship could be rebuilt on healthier foundations, or whether Jessica still saw me primarily as a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. Either way, I was finally strong enough to handle whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.